Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, we are celebrating Canada Day by drinking delicious Canadian whiskey and by talking about some of the best Canadian death metal albums of all time. Y'all should know by now, I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I kinda love this country, warts and all, and believe me, there are some warts, but there's also a lot of all. And I also love Canadian metal. I think we have an amazing scene up here, death metal especially. There's so much awesome Canadian death metal. So I figured, fuck it, let's just talk about awesome Canadian death metal for a change. Why not? Fuck album reviews. Fuck drinking games. I mean, we're still gonna drink. But today, let's just talk about some badass fucking music that just so happens to also be from my neck of the woods. Today, I'm drinking a little bit of maple cask whiskey from the Wayne Gretzky Estates here in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Anna and I actually got a private tour of the estates about 2 weeks ago when we were in Niagara Falls, and it was absolutely stunning. If you ever find your way up to Niagara-on-the-Lake, if you ever find your way up to Niagara Wine Country in southern Ontario, I highly recommend checking out the estates. They didn't pay me a dime to say this, by the way. I just kind of want to say it because the whiskey's that good. The estate is that cool. So yeah. Anyways, back to the actual subject matter. Top 10 Canadian death metal albums of all time. I have chosen 10 albums that I feel fully display and capture the beauty, the majesty, the power, the attitude, the spirit of Canadian death metal, and to an extent, the Canadian metal scene as a whole. As per the norm with any top 10 list we do here on the Metal Meltdown, this is not really a ranked or numbered list. I'm just going to talk about each album in order of release. And let's officially start with None So Vile, the sophomore studio album from Cryptopsy, released July 3rd, 1996 via Wrong Again Records. An icon of technical and brutal death metal, not just here in Canada, but also worldwide. An absolutely vicious, uncompromising, bloodthirsty experience from start to finish, filled with monstrous vocals and onslaughts of riffs and beats that bludgeon with a surprising level of surgical precision. It's tight, it's fast, it's brutal as nasty. 28-ish years later, it remains an absolutely fantastic record. Dare I argue, a masterpiece of technical and brutal death metal. There's really not much I can say about this record that hasn't already been said. If you love Canadian death metal, or just death metal in general, then there's a good chance you probably already know about this record, and you probably already have feelings on it, and I'm willing to bet those feelings lean toward loving as opposed to hating, because, duh, it's amazing. It's literally so fucking good that Cryptopsy just couldn't live up to this record. Like, literally everything they've done has felt like a step down. Not that they haven't tried, but this is just too good. It just can never be topped. It's so amazing. Next up, we have Obscura from Gorguts. This is the band's third full-length studio album, and it was released originally June 23rd, 1998, via Olympic and Slip Disc Records. This is a record I've gushed about many a time here on the Metal Meltdown, and as such, I don't really feel the need to go into extreme, full-length, articulate detail. But obviously, since you're here, I'm going to tell you why I love this record. I'm going to tell you why it's awesome. I'm going to tell you why this is an essential record, not just for Canadian death metal, but for Canadian metal as a whole. Obscura on paper makes no fucking sense. It is a somewhat awkwardly constructed record with a lot of jagged edges, a lot of weird time changes, a lot of weird time signatures, weird chords, dissonant soundscapes, agonizing vocals and textures. It's chaotic. It almost from a distance looks like a clumsy, drunken mess. But once you start peeling back all the layers, and once you kind of get past how inherently uncomfortable so much of this is, you very quickly learn this is perhaps one of the most incredibly constructed and complex records of all time. This album quite literally breaks and then rewrites and then re-breaks the rules of music and music theory consistently across its runtime. And it does so in absolutely spectacular fashion. This isn't just a great Gorguts record or a great Canadian death metal record. This is perhaps one of the most influential extreme metal records of all time. There's a lot that's happening in technical and avant-garde death metal that you can trace back directly to this record. Next up, we have Defiant Imagination, released November 4th, 2004, via Skyscraper Music. This is the third and final full-length studio album from this French-Canadian technical melodic death metal crew, and truth be told, everything in their discography is really good, but I'm choosing this album specifically because I feel this is their most cohesive, their most refined, their best produced, and their most imaginative as well. It does a great job at blending guitar-driven melodicism and some really great, epic, high-stakes songwriting with a lot of technicality and a lot of progressive and technical death metal instrumentation. At times it feels like an explosive and emotive mix of like mid-90s death and atheist, a little bit of very early Opeth, At the Gates, Cataclysm. Just overall a strong and exhilarating record from start to finish. I'm not really sure why these guys called it quits. I'm not really sure what's become of the individual members since, but I do know that they went out on one hell of a high note with this thing. Next up, we have Trilateral Progression from Neuraxis, released September 13th, 2005 via Willowtip Records. I would say that these guys are like the underdogs of like Canadian death metal. They've been around for a long time, but they've never really seen a lot of success. They don't really have a massive following, to my knowledge at least. Probably doesn't help that they haven't put out an album or done a lot of touring in a long time. Which is a shame, because they really have put out some solid material. So much solid material that it was actually difficult to decide which Neuraxis album specifically I wanted, and it eventually came down to either this one or 2011's Acylon, or Cylon. I don't know, the whiskey's starting to hit. I ended up choosing Trilateral Progression because I love the production of this thing. I like how bright and well-polished it is. And overall, I just feel like the material on here is a lot more urgent, a lot more cathartic, a lot more powerful. It has more to say and more to prove. Somewhat similarly to Quo Vadis, Neuraxis pull from both technical and melodic death metal. I think Neuraxis differ in the sense that they pull more so from tech death than they do mellow death. It's a very crushing record. It has a lot of force. It has a lot of momentum. It's a little bit more spacious at times too. Like, I feel this gives the listener a little bit more room to breathe, and that kind of gives this a very like enveloping, almost cinematic kind of feel too. I'm gonna go on record too and just say Rob Milley, one of the most underrated guitar players maybe in all of death metal. Like, dude's an absolute fucking beast. Definitely check this bad boy out if you haven't already. A hidden gem of Canadian death metal from a severely underrated band. Next up, we have The Aura from Beyond Creation, released April 11th, 2011 via PRC Music. This is the debut studio album from this French-Canadian technical and progressive death metal crew, and I'm just gonna say it, quite possibly one of the best tech death, prog death records ever made. Some absolutely mind-blowing instrumentation and songwriting consistently on display from start to finish. The production gives room for everything and everyone to breathe and to shine in the spotlight. Amazing fretless bass work, some otherworldly guitar stuff, punishing percussion, even the vocal stuff, you know? I mean, it's pretty straightforward for death metal, but it does have this very commanding and fierce energy to it that I think works well alongside everything else. The songs almost have a bit of a jazzy, improvisational flow to them as well, as we web in and out of grooves and in and out of these complex melodies and arrangements. I remember being introduced to this album and this band by a friend of mine back in the day, like 2012, 2013-ish. I remember going to see Beyond Creation open for Cannibal Corpse and Napalm Death and Immolation at the Phoenix Concert Theater here in Toronto as well. It was an amazing fucking show. There's so many songs from this record that remain wedged in my brain years later because they're genuinely really memorable. Just an absolute masterclass in progressive death metal. Like, if I were to do a top 10 tech death, prog death list, this would be damn near close to the top. Hey, we've reached the halfway point. Let's celebrate with some more whiskey. Oh man, that's fucking delicious. Note to self, go to the LCBO, buy more of this stuff. It is so fucking good. Holy shit. Another note to self, if it's not at the LCBO, call an Uber, get to the Estates. Goddamn. Hey, Wayne Gretzky Estates, if you're listening, pay me. I'm shilling your shit for free. Imagine what I'd do if you paid me. Imagine. Alright, I am definitely going to butcher the pronunciation of this next album title for two reasons. The first of which being, I'm a little tipsy. The second of which being, you know, honestly, I flunked grade 9 French. I actually ended up dropping French entirely in high school because I was so bad at other subjects. So I'm extra bad at French as a result of that. So you're going to have to really bear with me. And you're going to have to really fucking just, like, keep it together. We are now talking about Le Dernier de Crépuscule. De Crépuscule. See, I just fucked that up to hell and back. But it is the only full-length studio album from Chtheilist, released January 29th, 2016 via Profound Lore Records. This is the brainchild of one Phil Touga, who you may recognize from like 100 other fucking bands because he's a busy guy. You may recognize him from his work with Atramentis, who released an absolutely amazing, if not one of the best, funeral doom records ever back in 2020. It was called Stygian. Consider it an honorable mention, honestly, since we're here. Fuck it. You may also recognize him from Funebarum, Into Eternity, First Fragment, Void Ceremony, Worm. The dude's all over the fucking place, an incredibly talented human being. Anytime I see his name attached to something, I immediately pay attention. Great guy as well. We did an interview with him way back in the day where he discussed the everything surrounding Atramentis and this band in question, Chtheilist, and kind of the rich lore that encompasses both worlds. Anyways, Le Dernier de Crépuscule. Yeah, amazing, underground, death metal, dense, rich, filled with atmospheric flourishes. A lot of twisted, demented riffs and arrangements, ghastly, ghoulish, otherworldly vocal spats. Ominous, haunting, chanting vocals looming over top of everything. These elongated, droning passages adding so much weight. It just kind of sounds like a nightmare from another dimension trying to swallow you whole. And it very nearly accomplishes that task, might I add. If I were a little more fucked up, it probably would absolutely succeed. Shout out to Ty Tilley while we're here as well, because if it weren't for him, I really wouldn't know much about Phil Touga. Like, he's the one that introduced me to Chtheilist and Atramentis and Phil Touga. So, cheers, bud! Oh, now it's... Oh, yeah, now it's really starting to hit. Next up, we have Iris from Altars of Grief, released March 21st, 2018 via Hypnotic Dirge Records. And I might be cheating with this particular inclusion, because this isn't really a death metal record per se. Death metal is more of a component, an ingredient, rather than, you know, the main protein, you know? It's the mashed potato, it's the collard greens, not the steak. But it is an important ingredient. Like, I love mashed potatoes, I love collard greens. And it works in harmony with the other ingredients to create an incredibly satisfying dish. So I'm going to include it, and that's that. Fuck you. I would describe this as like blackened, atmospheric death doom. There's kind of a lot going on here, but that feels like a pretty safe description. Tremolo riffs, agonizing doomy sprawls, and screeching emotive vocals with walls of atmospheric soundscapes and textures, haunting vocals and keyboards. There's a lot of melancholy, a lot of sorrow, a lot of misery, a lot of pain. Of everything we're talking about in today's video, it's the least fun, shall we say, you know? Okay, maybe Chtheilist isn't, like, fun per se either, but in a room full of fucking, like, death metal nerds, I can probably still play that and still have fun. Whereas this is more of a rainy day and red wine kind of album. And by rainy day and red wine, I'm not referring to like a light drizzle in a glass of Merlot. I'm referring to torrential downpour and like 3 or 4 bottles of like heavy red wine. At a certain point, as strings and clean vocals and these very sobering arrangements are introduced and then contrasted with like the blackened deaf doom, it just becomes genuinely heart-wrenching. Another extremely underappreciated record from another extremely underappreciated band, like another hidden gem of Canadian death metal, even if we are, using the term death metal somewhat generously here. Next up, we have Manor of Infinite Forms from Tomb Mold, released June 2nd, 2018 via $20 spin. This shit right here is just gruesome, gnarly, gross, disgusting, underground Canadian death metal madness. Like, I can practically feel the acid and the blood dripping down on me. I can feel chunks of God who fucking knows what, and maybe I don't want to know what, being flung at me by Tomb Mold as they play this. It's a very twisted and deranged record, with a lot of weird arrangements and a lot of really brutal performances, and a production that kind of like perfectly captures this really gross, scuzzy, slimy feel. The bludgeoning riffs, the churning grooves, the very stark, gross sound and atmosphere, the feedback that can occasionally be heard from the guitar and the drums and the bass. With Tomb Mold specifically, I probably could have picked literally anything from their discography and it would have fit in just fine on this list. In fact, I was dangerously close to picking 2019's Planetary Clairvoyance over this. But after listening to the two back-to-back, I do feel like Manor has a little bit more of an edge and it ends up coming out on top. Planetary Clairvoyance is a more expansive record, I'll give it credit, but this is a more brutal record. And let's just be honest, sometimes when it comes to death metal, that's really all we're looking for. That's really all we want. Next up, we have Come Forth to Me from death metal supergroup Akurion, released independently April 10th, 2020. I gushed over this album back in the day, and I'm happy to now have the chance to gush about it again, because it really is an incredible record that way more people need to pay attention to. Holy shit. And by supergroup, I really do mean supergroup. The aforementioned Rob Milley from Neuraxis pops up on this thing. We also have Olivier Pinard from Cattle Decapitation on bass, Mike DeSalvo, formerly of Cryptopsy, on lead vocals. And we need to talk specifically about Mike DeSalvo for a moment, because there's a lot that happens in his personal life that influences the writing and production of this record, and also continues to change how it impacts people, both during its release and in the years past. During the production of this record, Mike's wife, Genevieve, who was also contributing to the record herself with a lot of vocal stuff, was battling cancer, and unfortunately, she lost that battle. That was something that played in both delaying the album, which had been in production for a long time, and also something that unintentionally but importantly changes a lot of the core themes of this record. The song Bed Sores to the Bone is a great example, where Akurion kind of talk about watching somebody die in a hospital bed, which is an incredibly gruesome experience, especially when you consider that, again, Mike's wife, Genevieve, was battling cancer and lost that battle while this album was being finished. Petals from a Rose Eventually Wither to Black is a great number as well, because it is Mike and Genevieve singing together on this album, I assume for the last time, unless they did something else together. It's not just that, though. There are a lot of other great components to this record, like how it combines like technical and progressive and old school death metal into something that is fluid and punishing and unpredictable. A lot of great collabs on this record as well, some orchestral arrangements courtesy of Luc Lemay of Gorguts fame. There's also like a three-pronged vocal assault with Mike DeSalvo, the aforementioned Luc Lemay, and also Lord Worm, another former member of Cryptopsy. Yet another, as I've said before, underrated record from an underrated band, a hidden gem of Canadian death metal. Probably one of the most emotional and powerful records that we're talking about today as well. And finally, this brings us to Bleed the Future from Archspire, released October 29th, 2021 via Season of Mist. I have often described technical death metal, especially modern technical death metal, as a colossal pissing contest. I remind you of this now because, frankly, there is nobody who pisses further and harder than Archspire. And also smellier. Like, they have won the pissing contest with Bleed the Future. This is one of the most absurdly technical records I've ever heard in my life. The precision, the speed, the intensity, the brutality, it's insane. And what's remarkable is that unlike a lot of other modern tech death bands, Archspire have actually remembered, hey, we should also write songs and produce them in a way that makes sense. Like, interwoven between all these insane shotgun bursts of pure, obscene technicality are legitimately some good grooves, some decent melodies. The songs have a lot of momentum and a lot of charge to them, and they're just so much fun to listen to. Like, it's really hard not to sit down and listen to this album and not be extremely stupidly pumped within seconds. Oliver Ray Aleron has such a unique style of vocals, too. Like, he takes a lot of inspirants from, like, hip-hop and gangster rap, and he brings that into here, and he's able to, like, kind of just, like, rapidly fire off these gutturals at an absolutely insane speed. It's so good and so fast and so technical that I genuinely wonder where Archspire can go from here within the confines of this genre. Like, I feel like we've surpassed the physical limitations of this thing, and the only way for Archspire to get better and to get faster and more technical beyond this is to somehow become like superheroes or to learn witchcraft or something. I guess we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get there. There's really nothing we can do right now. What we can do right now, though, is listen to Bleed the Future because it's amazing and I love it, and you should listen to it if you have not already. And voila, there you have it. Top 10 Canadian death metal records. Booyah! Now it's your turn to tell me, what are some of your favorite Canadian death metal bands and records? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Did I get it somewhere in the middle? Please let me know. Do so in the comments section. Do so on Discord. Look, you can press this button. Look, there are other videos here. Happy Canada Day. Hell yes. Party time forever. I love you. Thank you for watching, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day. Ah!